Lex Luger possessed one of the most astonishing physiques ever seen in the world of professional wrestling. The WWE poured a fortune into crafting him as the heir apparent to Hulk Hogan, a plan that spectacularly imploded when his championship aspirations vanished at SummerSlam '93. Yet that very public failure was merely the prologue to the far more stunning and tragic chapters of Luger's life. So how did the superstar, once hailed as the total package, ultimately find himself paralyzed inside a hotel room, his girlfriend tragically deceased, and his entire legacy lying in absolute ruins? The story begins back in 1958 in Buffalo, New York, with the birth of a boy named Lawrence Wendell Full. Long before the world knew him as Lex Luger, he was simply another talented college athlete whose dreams of reaching the NFL were quickly and spectacularly falling apart. His journey began with considerable promise at Penn State, where Full's athletic career seemed destined for greatness. It wasn't until his transfer to the University of Miami that the path grew significantly more complicated. The Miami Hurricanes football program should have been the perfect springboard to a lucrative professional career, but in a flash of uncontrollable temper, everything changed forever. Following an intensely frustrating game, Full completely lost his composure, trashing a hotel room in a fit of rage that resulted in his immediate dismissal from the team. This single explosive incident was an early glimpse into the volatile personality that would simultaneously fuel his rise and orchestrate his downfall throughout his entire career. Even with such a colossal setback on his record, Full's raw physical gifts were far too remarkable for scouts to completely disregard. Standing at an imposing 6'4", with a physique that looked as if it were sculpted by the gods themselves, featuring wide, powerful shoulders that tapered down to a trim waist, perfectly chiseled abdominals, and arms that seemed capable of bending solid steel, he still managed to hang around the edges of professional football for a few years. He had very brief tenures with a handful of NFL teams, which included the Miami Dolphins and the Green Bay Packers. But he predominantly spent his time as a bench warmer, watching the action from the sidelines. His time in the USFL, playing for the Memphis Showboats and later the Tampa Bay Bandits, offered a bit more hope. But it was becoming painfully obvious that a future in football just wasn't in the cards. It was precisely during this uncertain period of professional limbo in Tampa that destiny made a dramatic intervention. A pair of renowned wrestling figures, Hiro Matsuda and Barry Windham, happened to notice Full during one of his intense workouts at a local fitness center, where the rigid structure of professional football had struggled to contain his untamed athletic power. The theatrical world of wrestling appeared to be the ideal stage for his incredible talents. Wrestling promoters have always been on the lookout for larger-than-life physical marvels, and Full was the living embodiment of their ideal. They approached him with a simple, life-altering observation: "You've got the look." For a struggling athlete watching his football dreams evaporate, the question, "Have you ever thought about giving professional wrestling a shot?" was a game-changer. This simple suggestion felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Full readily agreed to begin his training under Matsuda's tutelage, having no real concept of the grueling world he was about to enter. You see, Matsuda was no ordinary trainer. He had a fearsome reputation built on his incredibly brutal and punishing training methodologies. This was the very same man who had notoriously broken a young Hulk Hogan's leg during a training session, simply to gauge his dedication to the wrestling business. If you could survive training with Matsuda, you had undeniably proven your toughness. The regimen was nothing short of agonizing. It involved countless hours of excruciating submission holds, relentless cardiovascular drills, and the painful process of learning to take falls hundreds of times each day on the unforgiving canvas of a wrestling ring. The vast majority of aspiring wrestlers would have quit. But Full's sheer determination, the very same defiant stubbornness that had previously landed him in hot water, now emerged as his most valuable asset. He pushed through the immense pain, meticulously absorbed every piece of knowledge, and was ultimately reforged in the blistering fires of Matsuda's merciless training academy. In the year 1985, Lawrence Foal effectively vanished from existence, and the charismatic powerhouse known as Lex Luger was born. The regional territory of championship wrestling from Florida served as his initial proving ground, where he wrestled his first official matches and started to sculpt his iconic in-ring persona. The name Lex Luger was directly inspired by the infamous comic book supervillain Lex Luthor, a fitting choice for a man whose physically imposing stature naturally positioned him as a heel or villain in the dramatic narrative of wrestling. What made Luger so exceptional right from the start was the incredible speed with which he adapted to the complex art of performing in the squared circle. Most athletes making the switch from other sports to wrestling often appear clumsy and uncoordinated for years, but Luger moved with a fluidity and confidence that suggested he was born for this. His captivating blend of explosive power maneuvers, an astonishing degree of agility for a man his size, and an innate charisma immediately caught the attention of every major promoter in the business. Eddie Graham, the legendary promoter who ran the championship wrestling from Florida territory, saw a future superstar and a mountain of money in the young Luger. He didn't hesitate, fast-tracking him up the roster and booking him in matches against progressively more established and well-known opponents. In a matter of a few short months, Luger was already sharing the ring with seasoned veterans and more than holding his own. By 1987, a mere 2 years following his debut, Luger achieved something that was practically unheard of for someone so new to the industry. He triumphed over the formidable Nikita Koloff to capture the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship. At that time, this was considered the second most coveted title within the entire National Wrestling Alliance. For a wrestler with barely 2 years of professional experience, this victory was the wrestling equivalent of a rookie quarterback not just winning the Super Bowl, but being named the most valuable player. This monumental win firmly established Lex Luger as something far more than just an attractive face with an incredible build. He was now a certified main event player in the world of professional wrestling, a legitimate superstar capable of headlining major events and drawing massive crowds. A football washout turned wrestling phenomenon in less than 3 years. But just as Luger was getting comfortable with the United States Championship around his waist, his career was on the verge of a complete and total transformation. Because wrestling's most elite and prestigious faction came knocking at his door. The Four Horsemen, famously led by the nature boy Ric Flair himself, had set their sights on this muscular prodigy. This wasn't just any group. This was wrestling's version of royalty, an exclusive club that very few were ever invited to join. In the 1987 landscape of Jim Crockett Promotions and the NWA, the Four Horsemen were the undisputed gold standard of wrestling superiority. Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Tully Blanchard were true masters of their craft, technical wizards who could dismantle opponents with surgical precision inside the ring, while living a lavish, jet-setting lifestyle outside of it. They were not about flashy costumes or silly gimmicks. They were, quite simply, the best in the business. So, what on earth made the Horsemen decide to take such a significant risk on a relative newcomer like Luger? With just 2 years of experience under his belt, he was a far cry from the polished, veteran performer that had come to define the group's impeccable reputation. While Lex Luger may not have possessed the refined technical skills of his contemporaries, he more than compensated with an absolutely commanding physical presence and a brand of star quality that simply cannot be taught. The juxtaposition was genuinely jarring. It was as though a powerful sledgehammer had been introduced to a delicate collection of surgical tools. This esteemed group of supremely elegant and technically masterful wrestlers actively recruited a chiseled physical marvel, whose in-ring strategy revolved almost exclusively around raw, unadulterated power. Luger introduced a dimension of brute force that was completely new to us, Ric Flair would later reminisce. He was the final, crucial piece that made our arsenal whole. This move fostered an incredibly captivating dynamic inside the faction. You had Flair, Anderson, and Blanchard executing their craft with surgical precision, contrasted by Luger, who contributed an overwhelming and intimidating aura. He functioned as their heavy hitter, their primary enforcer, a distinctly different element that perfectly enhanced the group's pre-existing sophisticated style. For Luger, the rewards from this new association were both instantaneous and immense. It felt like it happened in the blink of an eye. He was transformed from a promising newcomer into a man seated among the absolute legends of the wrestling world. The guidance he received away from the cameras proved to be utterly priceless as he watched true masters of the art form every single night. Each long drive from one city to the next became an impromptu seminar, a mobile classroom where icons like Flair, Anderson, and Blanchard imparted decades of wisdom on in-ring psychology, the subtleties of timing, and the crucial business side of professional wrestling. This intensive, hands-on education fast-tracked Luger's evolution at a pace he could never have hoped to achieve had he remained a solo act. With every subsequent match, his self-assurance visibly swelled, and consequently, his performances inside the ring began to exhibit a new layer of sophistication and depth. He started to consciously weave in the finer points and subtle techniques that he had diligently absorbed from his highly experienced horseman stablemate. These were the critical, yet often overlooked details. Things like executing a move with perfect timing, using facial expressions to convey a compelling story to the audience, and mastering the crucial balance between displaying his own overwhelming power and effectively selling the impact of his opponent's attacks. His connection with the Horsemen caused Luger's professional standing and overall status to skyrocket at an exponential rate. Being a member of this elite faction guaranteed him higher-profile bouts against the industry's biggest names. His screen time on television expanded dramatically, and his image was featured much more prominently on posters and other promotional items. The sheer prestige of associating with Ric Flair, who was almost universally regarded as the greatest world champion of that entire generation, instantly bestowed upon Luger a level of credibility he had never possessed before. The moment audiences saw him sharing the stage with these iconic figures, they instinctively perceived him as someone who truly belonged in that upper echelon of talent. However, in the famously volatile world of professional wrestling, major success is seldom achieved without encountering significant turbulence along the way. As Luger grew more comfortable in his prominent role, and as his popularity with the fan base continued to surge, almost imperceptible frictions started to develop deep within the group's core. From its very inception, the Four Horsemen was unequivocally Ric Flair's domain. He was the undisputed figurehead, the reigning world heavyweight champion, and the primary attraction that consistently drew paying crowds. But a definitive shift was occurring. Luger's incredible physique and rapidly improving in-ring abilities were capturing more and more attention and widespread admiration, especially from the female segment of the audience. An atmosphere that had initially been one of friendly, internal rivalry slowly but surely began transforming into something far more intricate and noticeably strained. It became increasingly obvious that Lex Luger's personal ambitions were growing larger. He was no longer content with simply playing the role of Flair's powerful backup. He deeply aspired to be the main attraction, the true star of the show. While the United States Championship he held was a significant honor, the internal power structure of the group was both crystal clear and rigidly enforced. Ric Flair's World Heavyweight Championship represented the ultimate prize, the absolute pinnacle of the entire sport. This undeniable reality made a certain question not just possible, but completely inevitable. Could Luger truly be satisfied as the number 2 man in the group? Or were his sights now firmly set on usurping Flair's throne at the very top of the professional wrestling mountain? The industry's top promoters, keenly aware of this organically developing friction, astutely began to lay the groundwork for what would evolve into one of the most monumental and talked about storylines in the entire history of the NWA. With minor disagreements and simple miscommunications quickly began spiraling into overt displays of frustration. Naturally, Flair's larger-than-life persona, combined with his status as champion, ensured that he soaked up the vast majority of the spotlight. This glaring imbalance was a fact that proved increasingly difficult for the ever more confident Lex Luger to quietly accept. The situation finally reached its explosive climax in a truly dramatic fashion in 1988. During a high-stakes championship cage match, the Horseman brutally turned on Luger, executing one of the most unforgettable betrayals in the annals of wrestling. That single, shocking act of treachery instantly recast Luger in the eyes of the public, flipping him from a detested villain into a beloved hero as the fans rallied passionately behind the very man who had dared to stand up against the notoriously arrogant and dominant Horseman. Shedding his former identity as Flair's enforcer, Luger was reborn as a genuine main event superstar entirely on his own merits, complete with a built-in, red-hot feud against the most despised faction in the entire sport. The outpouring of fan support for Luger following his dramatic expulsion from the Four Horsemen was absolutely massive. Yet no one could have possibly foreseen the perplexing pattern that his career would soon begin to follow. Even though he possessed every single attribute one could possibly want in a champion, the incredible size, the chiseled look, and overwhelming fan adoration, Luger's professional journey would ultimately be characterized by a phenomenon that baffled all logic: a mystifying and consistent inability to secure the final victory whenever the World Championship was tantalizingly within his grasp. As the calendar turned from 1988 to 1989, Lex Luger was firmly positioned in the main event spotlight as the #1 contender to Ric Flair's championship. Their epic feud sent shockwaves of excitement through arenas nationwide, with the total package being perfectly cast as the physically dominant force who seemed destined to finally unseat wrestling's legendary Nature Boy. In one thrilling encounter after another, Luger's physical supremacy was on full display as he manhandled Flair, throwing him across the ring like a mere ragdoll and expertly locking in his signature, bone-crushing, torture-rack submission hold with practiced precision, all while driving the crowds into an absolute frenzy, chanting his name and hammering on the barricades in fervent anticipation. But just as victory seemed certain, the familiar, heartbreaking pattern would inevitably manifest itself. A conveniently timed distraction of the referee, a critical opportunity that was somehow missed, or a shocking and sudden countermove out of nowhere. By some incredible twist of fate, Flair would always manage to escape with his championship still around his waist, leaving the entire arena of fans sinking into their seats, stunned and utterly bewildered. "I really thought tonight was finally the night," one fan was famously heard yelling in pure frustration after their legendary Clash of the Champions bout, a match where Luger clearly had Flair pinned for a decisive 3 count, only for the official to reveal he had been knocked out of place and couldn't make the call. Backstage, away from the roaring crowds and the television cameras, the creative minds at WCW were intentionally shaping Luger's persona not as a champion, but as the perpetual ultimate challenger. He was being meticulously crafted to be a force so powerful that he always appeared to be a credible threat, yet was destined by design to never quite grasp that final, ultimate prize of the World Championship. This particular booking tactic proved incredibly effective, bolstering ticket revenue and protecting Flair's top-tier status within the organization. Yet it carried a heavy personal price tag. Behind the scenes, Lex Luger's frustration festered over his unending position as the almost champion, leading him to reportedly challenge management on his career path, even as the audience remained captivated by his relentless, yet fruitless, pursuit of the title. Initially, the audience bought into this narrative, viewing it as just another element of the dramatic storyline. It's a classic trope, after all. The thrill of the chase frequently outweighs the satisfaction of the final win. However, as one championship opportunity after another seemed to escape Luger's powerful grasp, the crowd began to watch his matches with a strange sense of cynical expectation, anticipating the inevitable swerve. Whenever Luger started to build momentum in a high-stakes match, you could hear spectators murmuring amongst themselves, almost predicting the letdown that was sure to come. And so, the Luger paradox began to crystallize. A wrestling phenomenon who possessed every physical tool imaginable, yet seemed incapable of closing the deal when a major championship was at stake. So, when Lex Luger finally did secure the WCW World Heavyweight Championship in 1991, the moment felt hollow and anticlimactic. He hadn't triumphed over his established arch-rival to win it. Instead, he was merely filling a void left by another. During what should have been his crowning celebration, audience members held up signs demanding to know, "Where's Flair?" completely overshadowing the new champion. Predictably, his tepid title reign was short-lived, lasting only a few months before he was dethroned. The promotion's lack of faith was palpable. They never truly backed Luger, positioning him as a placeholder champion instead of the face of the company. This handling only strengthened the burgeoning narrative that, for all his impressive physical attributes, Luger simply didn't possess the essential qualities of a true world champion. This stark contradiction became a point of intense fascination for wrestling analysts and commentators. How was it possible for an athlete who so perfectly embodied the image of a champion to consistently fall short of becoming one? While Luger seemed to accumulate United States championships effortlessly, the industry's ultimate prize always remained just out of reach. This pattern established a kind of invisible barrier for him, a glass ceiling situated just above the level of secondary titles, a barrier he could consistently reach but could never seem to shatter. His detractors were quick to label him a choke artist, suggesting that regardless of his extraordinary physical talents, he was missing that intangible, crucial element that elevates a good performer into the realm of legendary champions. This damaging reputation was solidified during the notorious Lex Express promotional tour in the WWF. After an extensive, months-long build-up to a title match against Yokozuna at SummerSlam in 1993, Luger's victory came by the underwhelming technicality of a countout. In a baffling creative decision, the WWF then orchestrated a full-blown celebration, complete with balloons and confetti, for a competitor who hadn't actually won the championship. The bewildered audience looked on as patriotic red, white, and blue streamers cascaded from the ceiling. A bizarre scene that only served to inflict further harm on Luger's already fragile credibility. This cycle of near misses repeated with such frequency that it became a defining, undeniable part of his story, forging a legacy that still shadows him. The physical marvel who appeared invincible, but consistently failed to secure victory when it mattered most. His career stands as a powerful cautionary tale within the wrestling world. Possessing the look of a champion is no guarantee of actually becoming one. By the beginning of 1992, Lex Luger had arrived at a critical juncture in his professional journey, a true career crossroads. Even with his remarkable physique and numerous title reigns in WCW, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had reached the upper limit of his potential there. He had grown profoundly frustrated by the relentless pattern of getting tantalizingly close to the main event championship, only to fall short time and time again. As internal conflicts escalated within WCW and his own career trajectory began to stall, Luger made a monumental choice that would forever reshape his public persona. He defected to Vince McMahon's rival promotion, the WWF. This career move, however, did not come without a significant and costly consequence. Luger was forced to agree to a full-year non-compete clause, a stipulation that effectively benched him from the squared circle throughout what should have been the absolute peak of his athletic career. This wasn't just a simple change of employer. It was an audacious, high-stakes gamble aimed at revitalizing a career that had been mired in years of frustrating stagnation. McMahon's initial strategy was to showcase Luger's phenomenal physique in his burgeoning World Bodybuilding Federation during the contractual waiting period. Fate, however, had a different script in mind. A catastrophic motorcycle crash in June of 1992 completely upended this temporary plan, leaving Luger seriously injured and professionally adrift just as the WBF organization itself crumbled and folded. When Lex Luger at last made his debut on WWF television in early 1993, the change in his character was nothing short of shocking. The once dominant, no-nonsense power athlete had been replaced by a persona completely and utterly obsessed with his own physical appearance. After a year-long wait and an investment totaling millions of dollars to secure his contract, the WWF's grand creative scheme was to transform Luger into the living embodiment of pure vanity in the wrestling world. His journey to the ring was reimagined as an elaborate performance of self-worship. The entrance ramp was lined with multiple full-length mirrors, arranged like sacred shrines dedicated to his own ego. Luger would pause deliberately at each mirror, engaging in a ritual of self-admiration. He would flex his muscles and gaze at his reflection with over-the-top expressions of satisfaction, turning a basic walk to the ring into a grand spectacle of narcissism. Every mirror served as a personal stage, where his performance was aimed not at the paying crowd, but solely at himself. This complex, narcissistic character was a 180-degree turn from the persona he had cultivated in WCW. The man once known as the total package had now morphed into the narcissist, a fundamental shift that moved the character's focus away from his in-ring prowess and onto his superficial looks. The transformation was even embedded in his entrance theme, which incorporated the sound effect of shattering glass. Broken mirrors meant to symbolize the complete demolition of his previous identity and the emergence of this new, egocentric creation. To establish this new character, the WWF strategically placed Luger in matches against some of the era's most gifted technical wrestlers, such as Mr. Perfect and Bret Hart. And while these contests certainly highlighted his capabilities as an effective, villainous performer, the reaction from the audience was consistently lukewarm at best. In spite of the high quality of his performances inside the ring, a vital element was clearly absent. A genuine connection between the character of Luger and the fan base failed to materialize. This failure to connect was especially perplexing, considering the enormous financial investment the company had poured into him. It is important to remember the WWF was navigating exceptionally turbulent times during this era. The exit of Hulk Hogan had left a massive void in terms of star power, and a deeply damaging steroid scandal was shaking the very core of the entire professional wrestling industry. Luger, regardless of his impressive past achievements, appeared to be caught in the crosswinds of this uncertain and transitional period. Behind the curtain, the promotion was fighting to forge a new identity for itself. The ongoing steroid controversy put Luger's physique-centric gimmick in a particularly uncomfortable spot, making him both a valuable asset and a significant potential liability at the same time. Ultimately, the rapidly changing culture and landscape of professional wrestling seemed to be actively working against the very character they had meticulously crafted for him. In a remarkably swift move, the WWF completely scrapped the narcissist persona after a mere 6-month run. Gone were the signature mirrors, and the preening self-admiration act was abruptly erased from television, signaling that plans were already underway for another drastic and complete reinvention. This sudden and dramatic change of direction was a clear admission of failure from the company's top brass. Despite significant planning and a hefty financial investment, Luger's character had spectacularly failed to resonate with the viewing audience. However, this public rejection of his character was far from the final chapter for Luger within the WWF. In fact, it was simply clearing the board for his most audacious and shocking transformation to date. A reinvention that would propel him toward the pinnacle of the industry in a way that absolutely no one could have possibly foreseen. Lex Luger's metamorphosis from a vain, preening narcissist into the ultimate all-American champion occurred on one fateful day that would permanently reshape the entire arc of his professional career. On the 4th of July, 1993, with thousands of enthusiastic fans crowded onto the deck of the historic USS Intrepid in New York Harbor, they became participants in an unprecedented spectacle, the live manufacturing of a patriot. The entire scene was orchestrated with meticulous precision. The reigning WWF champion, Yokozuna, who was consistently depicted as a monstrous foreign adversary, had thrown down an open gauntlet to any American athlete with the fortitude to try and body slam his immense 500-pound frame. Following a series of failed attempts by various celebrities and other athletes, Lex Luger made a jaw-dropping entrance, arriving dramatically via helicopter. The crowd absolutely erupted as he emerged onto the deck, clad in a Stars and Stripes t-shirt. In a matter of seconds, he achieved the seemingly impossible feat, powerfully hoisting Yokozuna's gigantic body into the air and slamming him down onto the mat, triggering an explosion of patriotic fervor from the ecstatic fans. In that single, electrifying instant, the narcissistic villain ceased to exist. In his place stood the embodiment of America's new wrestling hero, meticulously designed and custom-built to occupy the patriotic vacuum left by Hulk Hogan's recent departure. This character overhaul was instantaneous, total, and, most importantly, a completely fabricated piece of marketing genius. What came next was arguably the most costly and ambitious promotional campaign ever launched for an individual wrestler in the entire history of the company. The WWF proudly presented the Lex Express, a massive tour bus decked out in red, white, and blue, with Luger's heroic image emblazoned on its side, set to transport him across America on a highly publicized crusade. This, for an unrelenting 6 consecutive weeks, he was subjected to grueling marathon days, frequently traveling for upwards of 16 hours between various cities, shopping malls, countless media outlets, and tourist hotspots. The bus, it seemed, stopped everywhere. His days became a relentless blur of activity, where autograph signings seamlessly morphed into radio interviews, which in turn dissolved into yet another round of promotional appearances. This grueling campaign pushed his stamina to its absolute limit. Yet, even as he was being aggressively promoted as the company's next great standard-bearer, he took part in an astonishingly small number of actual matches. He had been transformed into a bona fide wrestling superstar who, ironically, was not doing any actual wrestling. This entire strategy laid bare the WWF's profound desperation to replicate the tried-and-true Hulk Hogan formula that had rocketed the company into mainstream consciousness during the 1980s. Luger's new persona was a complete Hogan clone. He entered arenas to the triumphant sound of Stars and Stripes Forever, donned ring gear themed after the American flag, and struck poses using the identical red and yellow color scheme that was Hogan's trademark. The underlying message was impossible to miss. Accept this new patriotic hero as Hogan's direct successor. As the date for SummerSlam 1993 drew nearer, the promotional hype escalated to a deafening crescendo. The ultimate question lingered in the air. Would this colossal financial gamble finally pay off? The WWF meticulously framed the entire event as the official coronation of Lex Luger. It was meant to be the climactic moment where their newly minted American hero would decisively conquer the foreign menace and seize wrestling's most coveted prize. And then came the utterly baffling creative decision that would forever cast a shadow over Luger's WWF career. After all the relentless buildup and manufactured patriotism, Luger defeated Yokozuna by countout, meaning he won the match, but completely failed to win the title. The events that immediately followed this confusing outcome only served to heighten the audience's sense of absolute bewilderment. Inexplicably, despite his failure to capture the championship, Luger was celebrated as if he had, showered with a cascade of confetti and balloons in a spectacle normally reserved exclusively for newly crowned champions. Commentator Vince McMahon passionately declared a triumphant victory for Luger, which created a bizarre and surreal disconnect between what the audience had just witnessed and the official narrative being pushed. "Just look at this celebration. Lex Luger has conquered Yokozuna," McMahon shouted with manufactured excitement, even though the on-screen reality was drastically and obviously different. In essence, Luger had been granted his one guaranteed championship opportunity, and it culminated in a title moment that was a complete and utter mirage. While the decision to have Luger win by a mere countout was purportedly a strategic move to extend the rivalry, the damage to his credibility was both instantaneous and irreversible. This enormous chasm between the massive promotional push and the deeply unsatisfying conclusion created a significant credibility gap that Luger would never manage to close with the WWF fanbase. Professional wrestling fans, despite their inherent willingness to suspend disbelief, immediately identified the fundamental, unforgivable flaw in the storytelling. You simply do not invest millions of dollars and have your star travel thousands upon thousands of miles and orchestrate months of coast-to-coast hype just to culminate in a hollow, technical victory that results in no change to the championship status quo. This bizarre celebration of what was ultimately a failure completely undermined the very foundation that the entire Lex Express campaign had painstakingly tried to construct. Even as the staff was sweeping up the last of the confetti from Luger's empty victory, a quiet revolution was already beginning to brew behind the curtain. And as the memory of the ill-fated Lex Express campaign started to fade, the professional wrestling industry as a whole was silently and secretly gearing up for an all-out war. But what if I were to tell you that the very same man who failed to deliver for the WWF was destined to land the single most devastating shot in the entire history of the Monday Night Wars? A single shocking appearance, lasting less than 2 minutes, was all it would take to completely transform Lex Luger's legacy from that of a failed patriot into an undisputed industry game-changer. By the time 1995 rolled around, Luger's star power within the WWF had plummeted dramatically from its previous heights. The same company that had once proudly paraded him across the country in a custom-wrapped bus had now unceremoniously demoted him to the tag team division, pairing him up with the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith. The pyrotechnics were gone, the American flags were packed away, and any hope of future championship opportunities had vanished. He was now just another mid-card performer, simply filling a spot on the roster. With his World Wrestling Federation contract winding down, Lex Luger made a move that was virtually unheard of at the time, initiating clandestine negotiations with the rival WCW while still performing under the WWF banner. The date was September 3, 1995, and Lex Luger was working a routine house show match in New York, where he partnered with the British Bulldog to face the Heavenly Bodies. It was an utterly unremarkable event, just another night on the road with nothing to make it stand out. Following the match, Luger quietly collected his payment and seemed to dissolve into the night, offering absolutely no indication of the seismic event he was about to trigger. What happened next would not only define his career, but would also ignite a war that would forever change the landscape of professional wrestling. Just 24 hours later, on the evening of September 4th, 1995, Ted Turner's World Championship Wrestling launched its flagship program, Monday Nitro, as a direct challenge to the WWF's Monday Night Raw. The premiere was broadcast live from the enormous Mall of America in Minneapolis, a spectacle in itself that was already generating a historic level of buzz. Then, midway through the inaugural show, a collective gasp swept through the arena followed by a moment of complete, stunned silence before the entire crowd erupted in a roar of disbelief, with thousands of fans leaping from their seats in absolute shock. There was no foreshadowing, no official press release, and no customary non-compete window between his employment with the two companies. Luger's sudden appearance was a strategic masterstroke, an unexpected gambit that instantly upended the entire playing field. In that single moment, every unwritten rule and gentleman's agreement that had governed the industry for decades was completely obliterated. This went far beyond a wrestler merely changing his employer. This was an open declaration of war, and the implications of this one act sent immediate shockwaves through the entire business. The move raised a tantalizing question across the industry. If a major WWF superstar like Luger could defect without any warning, who else might be preparing to jump ship? The statement made by WCW was powerful and unambiguous. They were no longer content to simply compete with the WWF. They were intent on causing shock, disruption, and playing by an entirely new set of rules. This bold maneuver became the first major shot fired in the brewing Monday Night Wars. And for Lex Luger on a personal level, it represented a monumental resurrection of his career. Seemingly overnight, he was transformed from a star whose best days were behind him into the most talked-about figure in all of wrestling. WCW capitalized on the momentum by immediately casting him in a high-profile role, which included a powerful on-screen reunion with his longtime real-life friend, Sting. Their compelling alliance quickly evolved into a cornerstone of WCW's programming, anchoring the show during a crucial period of growth and transition for the company. When the revolutionary New World Order storyline kicked off in 1996, marked by Hulk Hogan's shocking turn to villainy alongside outsiders Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, Luger found himself occupying a fascinating and ambiguous middle ground. Unlike the vast majority of WCW talent, who either stood in fierce opposition to the NWO or eventually joined its ranks, Luger carefully maintained a position of neutrality. Consequently, he was never fully embraced or trusted by the staunchest WCW loyalists, who viewed him with suspicion. Nevertheless, he consistently fought on the front lines against the NWO's hostile takeover attempt. This uniquely ambiguous role kept fans constantly guessing about where his true allegiances lay, adding complex new layers to a character that had often been criticized as one-dimensional. The absolute peak of Luger's sensational WCW comeback occurred on August 4, 1997, in the charged atmosphere of Daytona Beach, Florida, where, on that evening's broadcast of Monday Nitro, he achieved what many fans thought was impossible. He stood victorious over the seemingly unbeatable Hollywood Hogan, capturing the coveted WCW World Heavyweight Championship. The entire arena erupted in a deafening roar as Luger hoisted Hogan into his signature torture rack submission hold, forcing the NWO leader to surrender. For one brief, spectacular moment, the total package had finally reached the absolute summit of his profession. But in a pattern that had become all too familiar in his career, Luger's moment of ultimate glory would prove to be tragically short-lived. A mere 13 days later, at the Road Wild event, he lost the championship right back to Hogan, solidifying a narrative that Luger could reach the top but could never manage to maintain his momentum at that elite level. This two-year span, from 1995 to 1997, effectively marked Luger's last significant run as a credible main event performer. Although he continued to be an important figure on WCW television for several more years, his status on the card slowly but surely diminished as the company's creative vision spiraled into ever-increasing chaos. The television cameras meticulously documented Lex Luger's professional decline, but they completely missed the far more devastating collapse that was happening in his private life, away from the glare of the spotlight. When WCW officially shut its doors in 2001, The entire professional framework that had held Luger's fragile world together simply vanished along with it. And in the 2 years that followed, a horrific tragedy would unfold that would leave the entire wrestling world in a state of shock. For nearly 20 years, Lex Luger's existence had been shaped by the predictable routine and constant public validation that came with being a professional wrestler. The thunderous roar of a live audience, the surge of adrenaline from competition, and the unique camaraderie of the locker room had been the unshakable constants in his life. When Ted Turner's wrestling empire finally crumbled to dust, Luger found himself facing a challenge far more daunting than any opponent he had ever battled in the ring. He was confronted with a life that suddenly had no direction and no purpose. "Wrestling was all I knew," Luger would later confess in candid interviews. He poignantly added, "When that was gone, I felt like my identity was gone with it." In this immense vacuum, his relationship with Elizabeth Hewlett, known and adored by legions of wrestling fans as Miss Elizabeth, became his sole anchor. They had started working together back in WCW, where she was a celebrated manager and on-screen personality. After her very public divorce from Randy Savage, their professional bond deepened into a personal one, as they both tried to navigate the uncertain and often treacherous waters of a post-WCW existence. The pressures of this new life mounted with terrifying speed. The need to maintain a wrestler's world-class physique without the rigid structure of a major promotion led Luger down a dark path of substance abuse, while Elizabeth also struggled profoundly with the adjustment. "We were like two drowning people trying to save each other," Luger would later write with heartbreaking honesty in his autobiography. Their relationship began to deteriorate with alarming speed. On April 19, 2003, police were dispatched to the townhouse they shared in Marietta, Georgia, where they encountered an alarming and tragic scene. They discovered Elizabeth with visible physical injuries, and Lex Luger, the man once celebrated as a superheroic figure, was arrested and charged with battery. The former world champion, who had once famously battled Hulk Hogan, was now locked in a desperate fight against personal demons that were far more dangerous than any wrestling opponent. In a sign of his continuing spiral, just 3 days following the domestic violence arrest, Luger was driving through Cobb County when he crashed his car into the back of another vehicle. Investigating officers at the scene soon discovered he was driving with a suspended license and was also in illegal possession of a handgun. A second arrest in under 7 days painted a clear picture. This was a man in a complete, terrifying freefall. The devastating culmination of this downward spiral arrived on May 1, 2003. Paramedics were dispatched following a panicked emergency call originating from the couple's Marietta townhouse. Upon their arrival, first responders discovered Elizabeth completely unresponsive. Despite their desperate attempts to revive her, she was declared deceased shortly after being transported to a local hospital at the tragically young age of 42. News of her passing sent shockwaves through the entire professional wrestling community. Elizabeth Hewlett, known to millions as Miss Elizabeth, was revered as the quintessential First Lady of Wrestling, a trailblazing female manager whose grace and poise had captivated legions of fans throughout the 1980s and early 1990s. Her iconic on-screen and off-screen partnership with Macho Man Randy Savage had defined an entire era of the sport. And now, that celebrated figure was gone under the most heartbreaking of circumstances. "It was just impossible to wrap my head around," stated former wrestler Diamond Dallas Page, who described Elizabeth as genuine wrestling royalty. He added, "For her to be lost like this, it was simply inconceivable." As investigators conducted a thorough search of the residence, they began to uncover the grim reality hidden behind closed doors. They found a staggering cache of illicit substances, steroids, human growth hormone, and a vast quantity of prescription painkillers. Later, the toxicology report would tell the final, tragic story, confirming she died from a deadly cocktail of painkillers mixed with alcohol. In the aftermath, the full weight of the law came down on Lex Luger, and it came down swiftly and without mercy. The district attorney's office charged him with numerous felony counts for the illegal possession of controlled substances. The very body that had brought him fame and fortune was now a central piece of evidence in his own criminal case. When these new charges were combined with the previous allegations of battery and weapons possession, Lex Luger's spectacular plummet from the heights of stardom was absolute. With the evidence against him being insurmountable, Luger entered a guilty plea. The judge handed down a sentence that included a lengthy probation period, compulsory drug screenings, and substantial financial penalties. While some might have considered the legal repercussions relatively lenient, the verdict from the court of public opinion was merciless and utterly crushing. Almost overnight, the man once known as the total package transformed into the sport's most prominent cautionary tale. As he would later admit, he had officially hit rock bottom. Luger recounted the devastation, stating, "I lost absolutely everything that had any meaning to me. My career, Elizabeth, my reputation, it was all gone." This personal catastrophe also ripped the curtain back, exposing the dark, hidden side of the professional wrestling industry. For many decades, the business had relentlessly pressured its athletes to cultivate larger-than-life physiques, all while their bodies endured an unending cycle of brutal physical punishment. The necessary act of managing chronic pain frequently spiraled into full-blown addiction, and once the roar of the crowd faded, countless wrestlers discovered they were ill-equipped to handle the quiet normalcy of everyday existence. The story of Lex Luger's dramatic downfall resonated so powerfully, precisely because of the incredible heights from which he had fallen. This was not merely another wrestler on the roster. This was a bona fide superstar who had been the main event in arenas all across the nation. A man who stood toe-to-toe with the most legendary figures in the business. His staggering metamorphosis from a celebrated champion athlete into a convicted felon starkly illustrated the profound human toll hidden beneath the dazzling spectacle and glamour of professional wrestling. A professional wrestler's entire existence is built upon a foundation of physical power and athletic ability. But the terrifying question remains: what happens when that core identity is violently and unexpectedly torn away? For Lex Luger, the very man who was marketed to the world as the total package, that answer would manifest in a manner more shocking and catastrophic than anyone could have ever envisioned. Just when most people believed Lex Luger's story had concluded with the tragic chapter of his legal battles after Elizabeth's death, destiny revealed it was holding an even more merciless plot twist in reserve. His difficulties only compounded when in 2005, he was taken into custody yet again, this time for breaching the terms of his probation by leaving the United States to make an international wrestling appearance. It appeared that the once celebrated champion was caught in a self-destructive cycle, utterly incapable of avoiding further conflict with the law. His decision-making had become as tarnished as his public image. Then, on October 19, 2007, his entire world was irrevocably and permanently altered. Like a mighty titan struck down from the heavens, Luger was aboard a routine domestic flight when an unusual and alarming feeling began to overtake his body. In a matter of seconds, the very same man who had famously body-slammed the 500-pound Yokozuna was suddenly unable to move either his arms or his legs. A spinal stroke had occurred, instantly converting one of the most physically imposing figures in wrestling history into a man rendered utterly reliant on the care of others for his basic needs. This was a particularly cruel and devastating blow for an individual whose entire sense of self had been forged through sheer physical dominance and unparalleled power. His physicians provided a bleak outlook, giving him no assurances that he would ever regain the ability to walk. For almost a full month, Luger lay completely motionless, a prisoner locked inside the confines of his own unresponsive body. The mental and emotional trauma of this ordeal was more punishing than any finishing move he had ever suffered inside the squared circle. This former world champion was now engaged in an internal war, a fight for his own spirit that would prove to be more arduous than any championship match he had ever contested. Laying there, completely unable to move a muscle, well, it gives you an awful lot of time to think, Luger would later reflect during subsequent interviews. Within that enforced, terrifying quiet, compelled to face his own mortality and profound limitations head-on, a remarkable transformation slowly started to take root within him. Every minor victory during his rehabilitation, the simple act of wiggling a finger or raising an arm, demanded a marathon-like effort from the man who used to execute incredible feats of strength without a second thought. By June of 2008, following months of excruciatingly difficult physical therapy, Lex Luger accomplished something many of his doctors had deemed a near impossibility. With the help of his therapists, he was able to stand on his own 2 feet and then began to take his first hesitant steps, supported by the frame of a walker. His progress was incremental, but it was undeniably steady. By the year 2010, he had progressed to the point where he could walk with greater ease and was even able to drive a car again, although a full recovery remained an elusive goal. His physique, which was once a chiseled masterpiece of 275 pounds of solid muscle, underwent a startling transformation, shrinking considerably as a direct result of his medical condition. Yet, even as his imposing physical stature faded away, a different and more resilient kind of strength began to flourish deep within him. It was during this period, his absolute darkest hour, that Luger underwent a profound spiritual awakening, an experience that would ultimately eclipse any world championship title he had ever held. The athlete who had always defined his self-worth by championship belts and the size of his biceps finally found something far more enduring. Embracing his faith as a born-again Christian provided Luger with a renewed sense of purpose that transcended his physical capabilities. "I finally discovered my true identity," he would later explain with newfound clarity. "For my entire career, I was just a physique, just a body. Now, I realize that there is so much more to life than just that." The profoundly humbling experience of being dependent on others had completely remade a man once celebrated globally for his fierce independence and extraordinary strength. For a man whose entire identity was built on pure self-sufficiency and strength inside the ring, needing help with even the most mundane activities became a source of profound lessons. This newfound vulnerability allowed Luger to forge connections and gain perspectives that were entirely out of reach during his dominant years of seeming invincibility. By the year 2021, Luger found himself completely reliant on a wheelchair for his mobility. Yet, instead of surrendering his life to bitterness, he discovered powerful ways to give his new circumstances a deeper meaning. The individual whose chiseled physique once demanded everyone's attention now captivated people with the undeniable strength of his spirit and his compelling message. Perhaps the single most incredible chapter in Luger's profound transformation arrived when the very organization whose opportunities he had carelessly squandered years ago invited him to become part of their wellness program. The former main event attraction now found himself speaking with complete candor to the current roster of wrestlers, warning them about the insidious dangers of substance abuse and the importance of preparing for a life after the spotlight inevitably fades. He started making occasional appearances at wrestling conventions and on official programming, no longer in the capacity of a performer, but as a living, breathing testament to the power of resilience. The man who seemed fated to be defined by his failures and the tragedy of Miss Elizabeth's death had, against all odds, managed to rewrite his own legacy into one of profound purpose. When questioned about his physical state, Luger frankly acknowledges the daily challenges he faces, but does so entirely without a hint of self-pity. Instead, he consistently voices immense gratitude for his life's journey and for the chance to help other people avoid the same destructive pitfalls he fell into. This powerful humility demonstrates just how completely the total package persona has been unwrapped, revealing the authentic human being who was always underneath the muscular exterior. It is a personal transformation far more impressive than any championship victory he ever achieved. The professional wrestling industry that Luger joined back in 1985 bears almost no resemblance to the one that now highlights his story as a case study in wellness seminars. When a man who was engineered to be the perfect physical specimen becomes the unwilling poster child for an industry's darkest and most destructive tendencies, we are compelled to ask a difficult question. Did Lex Luger fail wrestling, or did the industry of wrestling ultimately fail him? Very few careers in the history of professional wrestling divide historians and fans quite as sharply as that of Lex Luger. For every single argument that he carelessly squandered his immense potential, there is a compelling counterpoint that he was pushed far beyond his natural capabilities by promoters who were simply mesmerized by his incredible physique. The actual truth most likely exists somewhere in the middle ground. He was an exceptionally talented athlete who was thrust into main event positions much faster than his developing skills truly warranted. Yet he was also someone who delivered truly unforgettable moments across multiple, distinct eras of wrestling. Lex Luger's long and storied journey through the world of professional wrestling serves as a fascinating, living timeline of the evolution of the business itself. He started his career back in the territory days, when small regional promotions dominated the landscape. Then he rose to national prominence during the era of major expansion, became an essential player during the Monday Night Wars, and now serves as a respected voice of caution in today's more wellness-focused environment. In the same way a wrestler transitions from a despised villain to a beloved hero, the industry itself underwent a dramatic and fundamental transformation during Luger's tenure. What makes Lex Luger's legacy so particularly fascinating is how closely it reflects the changing values and priorities within the wrestling world over time. When he first made his debut, the business prized enormous, larger-than-life physiques above every other possible attribute. Promoters saw immediate dollar signs in his perfectly sculpted muscular frame, positioning him in main events alongside technical masters despite his obviously limited in-ring experience. As the wrestling business evolved throughout the 1990s to place a greater emphasis on in-ring performance, Luger became the very emblem of a rapidly fading era. He was a massive superstar whose incredible look consistently overshadowed his actual wrestling ability in an industry that was increasingly starting to value technical skill. The entire business of professional wrestling transformed on a fundamental level while Luger was still a major figure occupying the spotlight. An industry that had virtually zero health safeguards was forced to evolve, partly as a direct response to the tragedies involving performers like Luger, into one with truly comprehensive wellness policies. Today's established protocols concerning substance testing, mental health resources, and rehabilitation support networks exist because the industry learned harsh lessons from the struggles of those who were forced to perform without any safety nets. The influence Luger has on current wrestlers reveals a striking duality. Some continue to draw inspiration from his once unbelievable physique, while many more now view his well-documented struggles with substance abuse as a powerful and sobering warning. He stands today as both a beacon of hope and a cautionary tale, a perfect physical specimen who managed to reach the highest peaks of wrestling, only to discover that the foundations beneath him were entirely unstable. His career path closely resembles the arc of wrestling itself, which was initially focused on spectacle and surface appeal before it eventually evolved towards creating something much more substantive and meaningful. Perhaps the most truly remarkable element of Lex Luger's story is the completely unexpected nature of his final chapter. The man who was once marketed to the world as being physically perfect now navigates his daily life with significant limitations. Yet, he has found a deeper purpose that completely eluded him during his various championship reigns. In more recent interviews, Luger often takes time to reflect on this astonishing personal transformation he has experienced. He stresses that the most important thing is having the courage to face your inner demons and to continuously strive for personal redemption. He explains that this personal journey from superstar to cautionary tale and finally to mentor perfectly represents wrestling's own larger evolution as an industry. Ultimately, the impact of Luger's experiences on the company's current approach to performer wellness remains incredibly profound and cannot be understated. His dedicated participation in these wellness programs grants today's wrestlers the invaluable opportunity to hear firsthand about the many pitfalls of fame from a man who has experienced both the highest glory and the deepest despair. His powerful message resonates with people because it comes from a place of hard-earned wisdom rather than from a position of judgment. This unique history makes him uniquely positioned to have a genuine influence on the next generation of up-and-coming performers. Lex Luger's entire life journey ultimately reveals that wrestling's true measure of success extends much further than championships or impressive physical attributes. For countless decades, the business relentlessly promoted superficial qualities, championship titles, incredible physiques, and spectacular entrances as the definition of greatness. Luger possessed every single one of these things in abundance. Yet at the peak of his success, he found himself feeling completely empty. The profound transformation of Lawrence Full from the total package to a man actively seeking deeper meaning offers what is perhaps the most valuable lesson for today's performers: that genuine personal fulfillment will always transcend professional accolades. It seems the entire professional wrestling industry has undergone this profound education, walking a parallel path of discovery right alongside Luger himself. Today's wellness policies finally acknowledge that the performers are people first, athletes second, and their on-screen characters a distant third. A monumental and dramatic reversal from the high-pressure era when Luger first climbed to stardom. His personal narrative perfectly chronicles wrestling's own maturation, from a time that valued chiseled physiques above personal well-being, to an era that now understands the immense human cost of such flawed priorities. Which brings us to our final assessment of his intricate legacy. And with that, we arrive at the conclusion of Lex Luger's truly remarkable story. The man who once personified the concept of the total package now provides a powerful lesson that genuine strength is never measured by championship belts or muscle mass. In recent candid conversations, Luger reflects on this, stating, "I've learned that life is about helping others and being of service, and that's what I try to do every day." This enlightened perspective represents an achievement infinitely more precious than any title he ever managed to secure inside the ring. The competitor once famous for flexing in front of mirrors now turns his focus outward, developing a documentary about his experiences to help others avoid the same devastating pitfalls. His incredible metamorphosis from a celebrated champion into a man of humble service uncovers a profound truth often overlooked within the wrestling world. This is the core revelation, that authentic fulfillment is not sourced from the roar of the crowd, but from the quiet dedication of serving fellow human beings. In the end, the greatest triumph for the total package was never achieved inside the squared circle. It was the discovery of his true purpose long after the dazzling spotlights had dimmed. Please like and subscribe for 100 years of luck. Until we meet again.